Well, welcome back to another week's Analysis Behind the News. As you know, those of you who watch this on a regular basis, I talk from time to time about BRICS. That is the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa international agreement that they operate under. And from time to time, it was getting to the point where people were starting to notice this. It was being talked about in the Wall Street Journal a lot, in the New York Times. Then suddenly they switched and started talking about this thing falling apart and so on and so forth. Well, it's really not. But they talk about South Africa trade hits bump, and that's regard to BRICS. But in the New York Times for Wednesday of last week, it had a little article saying emerging nations to form development bank. Emerging nations. Emerging nations. Now, when you have that in a headline, you think of, well, places in the backwater areas of the world, people who are behind economically and everything. But then when you get into here, you realize these are the backwater nations. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the members of the so-called BRICS group. Those are not emerging nations, unless you think of them in terms of emerging as a world power together. But what they're doing and what this is about is they're going to have a direct challenge from a new development bank that they are forming to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Well, it's not going to be a challenge, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't want to get into that aspect of it. But it is just going to be another thing to deal with on the international stage when it comes to financial interference around the world by the big boys. It will be made to look like we're on the side of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and they're on the side of whatever they're going to call this new BRICS entity. But they will both be working towards the same goal. We are just given, again, whether you want to be a Democrat or a Republican, but still arrive at the same goal in Congress, regardless of which party you support. On the international scale, these things are leading towards a one-bank world. We will have one bank in the world, and it will be part of what they call the New World Order. That's where this is going. At any rate, these nations, as I've said, are the new Soviet bloc. That's the way I believe it is. And people, they think, well, communism's dead, the Soviet Union's dead, etc. Well, take a look, ladies and gentlemen, at Russia. Do you think communism is dead with this guy Putin? These people are all ex-KGB people. And by the way, one of the things that's been a current development is the use of ex-KGB officers in cyber war. They've come in and now they're working for Microsoft and Interpol and other things right out of Moscow to help them solve their cyber problems, being attacked and so on and so forth. At any rate, that's a subject in itself, very interesting, that people really need to look at. That there are problems that develop here, and then these Russians come in and solve them, and they're the hero. No one asks the question, well, who created the problem? Maybe the same people created the problem that these people work for. They've never thought about that, because we do know the Chinese do it, right? Nobody talks about the Russians hacking into systems and creating problems. But when these things happen, these guys seem to be able to solve it very quickly. It doesn't happen very well if you don't know the source, if you don't know the programming that went into it. Another development. But at any rate, Brazil, let's take that one because that's the B. Brazil has been led in the last two presidencies by communists. The man who was the head of the Communist Party of Brazil woke up after the so-called collapse, called himself a Democrat, and was elected. The woman who is now the head of Brazil is a former communist terrorist. She used to blow people up, and they used to plot killing people, and now she's president of Brazil. Russia, we've already talked about that. India, go to Wikipedia and look up the Indian National Congress and see the background of that organization. It will shock you. These are the people that on again, off again run India. The background of the Indian government is socialist, period, at best. China, oh gosh, I'd still think that they're communist. And South Africa, well, let's take a look at this one. This is a picture that I have on my computer on my talk on terrorism. And this is a picture of Nelson Mandela. This is on the cover of the South African Communist. It is the official magazine organ of the South African Communist Party. And Mandela is standing in front of a bunch of hammer and sickles at the annual Communist Convention in South Africa. This guy has always been a communist. He is an individual that was jailed in South Africa for being not just a communist, but a communist terrorist. An individual who was amassing arms to bring about a revolt, a violent revolt, so on and so forth. So that's what's going on in BRICS. Now, I know Mandela is sold to the American people through Hollywood, through the national news, as this benevolent old grandfather. He's anything but. You know, not all people that kill you frown when they do it. They smile, some of them. And Mandela has a very engaging smile. But he is a communist, has always been a communist. And not just a person that believes in it theoretically. He was a communist terrorist leader. That's why he was put in prison. And they seem to forget that when they talk about him out of Hollywood or on ABC, NBC, or even Fox News. Oh, by the way, Fox News was just a sponsor of the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association. Fox News. Figure that one out. I think you can probably figure it out. At any rate, there are a number of different things that are very interesting in the news. One other thing I think I'll discuss, because it's going to be more and more important, because we were already talking about South Africa. Let's talk about Central Africa. The Congo. The Congo has had a communist government off and on for many, many years, most of the years that it's been in existence since its freedom from Belgium as a colony of Belgium. And now, all of a sudden, the United Nations has decided that unanimously that they are going to send in an offensive force of United Nations troops to quell a rebellion against the Congolese government. Now, wouldn't you think the Congolese government could handle it on their own? Apparently not. The M23 organization, which is the title of the rebel group out of the eastern provinces of the Congo, are in open rebellion, and they apparently are hard to handle. It's very muddied. We don't know which side's which, really, in the general scheme of things. Probably both sides are something we would not want to ever be involved with. But the interesting thing about all this is this. The M23 rebel group broke off to begin with and rebelled with the aid of a United Nations mission in eastern Congo. Now the United Nations is forming an army to go in and quell this rebellion. Maybe there's something more going on here that we better take a look at. Very interesting things. With that, we're kind of running out of time, but I want to mention one more thing that you probably know about, but that is that they've jailed the Egyptian satirist who has been mocking the president, Morsi, of Egypt. They put him under arrest because he dared get on television and have a satire about the president of Egypt. Oh my word, freedom of speech. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. They got rid of an oppressive regime, and now it seems as though the regime is even more repressive and are arresting people who are engaged in just simply making fun of the president. Can you imagine what would happen in this country? I think every other individual in this country would be put under arrest for making fun of the President of the United States. Till next week, we'll see you then.